So, shalom everyone. Today we'll start the ninth chapter about the negative and positive commandment of observing the Shabbat in terms of creative labor. Excuse my British English where I wrote with a U because I think that that's the proper way. So this is from Wiki Yeshiva, which was established by Rav Melamed's father, and all kinds of other people contributed, but they don't have a proper translation for this. So, mitzvot Torah, the commandments of the Torah, shelo la'asot davar asur, for to not do something that is prohibited. Ne'emra milvad b'lashon lo, besides the language of lo, like lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, do not commit murder, do not commit adultery. Gam belashon hishamer pen o al. So it was also written in three other ways. Hishamer means beware or be careful. Pen is lest, and al don't. So don't do this, don't do that. And so the three examples are lashon hishamer, kegon hishamer b'nega atzarat. So it says that you should be careful or beware of the signs of leprosy. That you should beware of not cutting away the signs of any kind of skin blemishes. Lashon pen, kigon pen tigdash melea, that lest the wheat becomes holy or consecrated because it's forbidden, which is a commandment not to eat wheat that grew very close to a vineyard. And Lashon al, do not, kigon al tifnu lo'avot ve'ladonim, do not turn to the people who are necromancers and yidonim, sorcerers of other kinds. So all of these are not thou shalt not, but rather three other languages. And so I think that's important to understand this introduction in order to understand the law of Shabbat. So Rabbi Melamed explains with three different verses what the prohibition of Shabbat of doing creative labor. It says the following: cessation from all melacha, creative labor on Shabbat, is a positive commandment. SHAMOR et Yom Shabbat legacho, as the Torah states, 6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh day you shall cease. And there's actually rabbis who explain that the commandment includes also to work during the 6 days of the week. So even if you are very rich and you don't have to go to work or do any kind of labor, it is a very good idea for mankind to be busy, because the opposite is that you're going to do the labor of Satan or the enemy or whatever you want to call it. And the Christian saying is, idle hands lead to sin, which is very rephrasing of what it says in the Gemara. One who performs malacha on Shabbat not only neglects this positive commandment, but also violates a negative one, as it states, but the seventh day is Shabbat of the Lord your God. You shall not do any malacha. That's in the Ten Commandments, Exodus chapter 20, verse 9. If one was warned by witnesses not to desecrate Shabbat, yet did so anyway, he is subject to the punishment of stoning, as we saw with the person who was gathering wood on Shabbat in the book of Numbers. And by the way, this morning in the Daf Yomi, we talked about stoning. If he desecrates Shabbat intentionally but was not warned by witnesses, meaning they didn't say, don't do it or else we will take you to the court and you will be stoned, he is subject to karet. I think the proper translation is excommunication. I'm not sure what the word extirpation means. As it written, you shall keep Shabbat, for it is a holy for you. Those who profane it shall be put to death, for whoever does melacha on it shall be extirpated. Nichreta hanefesh ahi, from among his people, and that's in Parshat Kitisa. And if he desecrates Shabbat unintentionally, he is liable to bring a sin offering. And that's a general rule in Masechet Kritut, which is that every time that there's karet for intentional commandment, but there weren't witnesses, If somebody does it unintentionally, the proper tshuva, the proper repentance is through a sin offering. Although it is a mitzvah to desist from all melacha, the Torah mentions four melachot explicitly: choresh, kotzer, mav'ir, and hotza'ah. Choresh and kotzer, plowing and harvesting, are mentioned in Shemot 34:21 for 6 days work, but on the seventh day cease. At the plowing and reaping, cease, which is also, by the way, mentioned at the end of Leviticus for the laws of the Sabbath year for the land, or sabbatical year, or Shemitah, as it's known in Hebrew. This teaches that even activities upon which human life depends, through which man produces food, are forbidden on Shabbat. Of course, we'll later on, when we learn the different laws, we'll find out that if there's pikuach nefesh, if somebody is starving and the only available food they have to cut from the tree or from the grain, of course they are allowed to do that. Kindling a fire is also mentioned explicitly. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on Shabbat, but the sages explain it in different ways. Sages state that this melacha is singled out to teach us that one is subject to punishment for each individual melacha he performs on Shabbos. By the way, the Hasidic understanding of this is that you're not allowed to fight on Shabbat, which is like fire. It has nothing to do with creative labor, just the idea that that you're, or not anything, but that's not the literal meaning, because why did this melacha, this creative labor, be excluded from the others, or mentioned specifically? Thus, if one performs two melachot unintentionally, he's obligated to bring two sin offerings, with, again, in the situation of shogeg. The melacha avotzah is mentioned explicitly as well in this coming week's parsha. Let everyone remain where he is. Let no man leave Yetzeh, his place, on the seventh day. And unfortunately, some of the people who take the Torah literally, like the Karaites, don't leave their bounds of neighborhood or city on Shabbat because of this verse, which they take literally. There's one community in Moshav Matzliach in Israel near Ramle, and they have a synagogue there, and it's active even on Shabbat because it is part of the neighborhood where everybody lives. And so they actually determine that the fence around the whole community is considered like it is one dwelling, which suggests that they do understand that there has to be a rabbinical explanation for what this is, because otherwise, literally, you would not be allowed to leave your house, your tent, on Shabbat at all. Hotza'ah is singled out to make it clear that even though it seems to be an insignificant activity because we're not creating anything by carrying in public domain, one merely moves an object but does not change it in any way, it is nevertheless considered a melacha. And the Gemara actually admits that this is called a melacha gru'ah, like a bad example for a melacha, for creative labor, because you're not really creating anything as a result. When the Torah prohibits doing melacha, it means creative work, like the melachot performed when erecting the Mishkan. Activities that do not create anything new, even if they are physically strenuous, are not prohibited. For example, carrying a needle from a Reshut Yachid private domain to the public domain is considered a melacha, while moving chairs and tables within the same domain is not. And the example I give, since in Israel I never lived in a house that has stairs inside the house, is if I take the couch up and down the stairs all of Shabbat long, I'm not breaking even one law. And even though I'm creating sweat is not considered a creative labor. Reheating cooked food on Shabbat is not a melacha, whereas cooking raw food on Shabbat is. And so sometimes it's prohibited because of what it looks like, and only Yemenite Jews reheat soup or liquid on Shabbat. The rest of the Jewish people do not. Attaching a window to its hinges is considered a melacha, even if it is easy to do so, whereas opening and shutting a window is not considered melacha, and we'll learn that later. Reattaching a broken table leg is considered a melacha, but lengthening a table by adding a leaf designated for such use is not, and we'll see below further when we learn this, because the ideas of melacha of Shabbat are very, very complicated and extenuous, and we'll have a lot of new understanding of what is and what isn't a melacha and why it is or isn't allowed on Shabbat. And we'll stop here.